The mornings in the town of Briswater were always slow and silver, painted by the mist that drifted from the ocean. Every day, before the sunlight found the rooftops, Elias was already awake, pouring coffee into the same chipped mug, opening the same leather-bound notebook, writing the same kind of plans. He liked order. It made the world feel smaller, predictable, manageable. He believed that a well-lived life was built on lists and silence, that if you just stayed busy enough, the things you didn't want to feel would eventually fade. His apartment was neat, his shirts ironed, his schedule unbending. There was a calm precision to everything he did, and yet inside that calm lived a quiet ache he never spoke of. Sometimes his eyes would wander to the empty chair across the table, the one he never moved, as if waiting for someone who might return. He never said her name aloud anymore. The world had gone on, and so had he, or so he told himself. People in town saw him as reliable, polite, successful, the man who always had the right answers. But beneath the surface, Elias carried small, unspoken regrets that followed him like shadows. Things he didn't say, apologies left unfinished, moments when pride had been louder than love. And though he didn't know it yet, his carefully arranged life was about to be tested by something he couldn't schedule, predict, or control. Something that would ask him to confront the silence he'd built his peace upon. Because healing, as he would soon learn, never begins in the noise of doing. It begins in the stillness of finally listening.
The days grew longer, and the world seemed to reward Elias's discipline. He earned a quiet promotion at work, the kind that came without applause, but everyone noticed. His reports were clean, his numbers precise, his ideas delivered with calm confidence. People began to rely on him for structure, for control, for the steadiness that others lacked. He didn't see it as ambition, just responsibility. He stayed late, stayed composed, and stayed alone. In his solitude, he built a fortress of small victories, freshly folded laundry, neat emails, perfect routines. They made him feel safe. They made him feel right. The town admired him. Colleagues described him as the dependable one. Neighbors waved when he passed, and even the barista at the small cafe by the pier knew his order before he spoke. It looked, from the outside, like peace. But there were moments, soft and fleeting, when he would catch his reflection in a shop window or see the empty horizon beyond the pier and wonder what all this steadiness was for. He never asked the question aloud. Instead, he doubled down. More hours, more order, more silence. He told himself it was discipline. Others called it strength, but in truth, it was fear dressed as control. The fear of losing what he couldn't fix or saying what he couldn't take back. Late at night, he'd find himself scrolling through old messages he never sent, rereading the words he had typed years ago but never had the courage to deliver. "I'm sorry," one began. Another, shorter, "Can we talk?" He would hover over the send button, feeling that familiar pulse of hesitation, and then close the screen. For Elias, success meant never letting anyone see the cracks. But cracks, no matter how small, always find a way to grow.
Elias had been leading a project that meant everything to him. A new design initiative that could redefine his company's reputation. It was the kind of work he dreamed of, something that finally made all his long hours seem worthwhile.
Alongside him was Mara, his colleague, his confidant, the one person who saw through his practiced calm. They worked side by side for months. Mara had a warmth that softened the sharp edges of his world. She laughed easily, spoke freely, and always asked questions he didn't want to answer. "You never tell me how you feel about anything," she once said with a teasing smile. He brushed it off. Feelings were distractions, and he had a deadline. But beneath the quiet hum of progress, tension brewed. Miscommunications, delays, a few decisions Elias made alone, thinking he was protecting the project, or maybe protecting himself. And then one morning, it happened. A meeting filled with voices raised just enough to wound. A mistake traced back to him, an apology left unsaid, and Mara walking out of the room with eyes that said everything words could not. The project collapsed within weeks, not from failure of design, but from failure of understanding. His silence, his constant refusal to speak when it mattered, had cost more than he ever expected. At home, the tidy apartment felt smaller. The lists meant nothing. The coffee turned cold faster each morning. He wanted to reach out to her, to explain, to apologize. But the longer he waited, the heavier the words became. And by the time he gathered the courage, she was gone. A new city, a new life, unavailable. For the first time, Elias faced the truth. You can win every battle of order and still lose the quiet war inside your heart. Elias responded to loss the only way he knew how, by working harder. He filled his calendar until there was no room left for thought. Early mornings bled into sleepless nights. The quiet ache that once visited only in pauses now hummed through every moment. But he refused to name it. Regret, grief, guilt, they were words that made him feel weak, and weakness was something he did not allow himself. He told himself that if he stayed busy enough, time would smooth over what had gone wrong. He convinced himself that silence was noble, that some apologies were better left imagined. When colleagues asked how he was, he smiled and said, "I'm fine, just tired." It was the easiest lie in the world. But at night, when the noise fell away, the ghosts returned. He replayed conversations, editing them in his mind. He imagined saying sorry, imagined her forgiving him. Then he'd erase the scene, rebuild it differently, perfect it until dawn. Yet every morning, the same heaviness sat at the edge of his bed, waiting. He stopped visiting the cafe by the pier. The barista noticed, but said nothing. Even the sea seemed to mirror his unrest, restless, gray, unending. The world kept moving, and Elias stayed still, hidden behind his walls of discipline. There were days when he felt proud again, moments when his name appeared on a company email or someone thanked him for his work. But those moments faded fast, leaving him emptier each time. Success without connection felt like holding a trophy in a dark room, shining but unseen. Elias wasn't living, he was maintaining, protecting the version of himself who didn't need help, who didn't feel too much. But inside, he was breaking in the quietest way possible, from the weight of words never spoken. The rain that afternoon came suddenly,
as if the sky had been waiting to weep for him. Elias sat on a worn wooden bench overlooking the harbor, his coat soaked through, watching the sea churn against the rocks. He hadn't meant to end up there. His feet had carried him out of his apartment, away from his screen, and down the hill as though his body knew what his mind refused to admit. He needed to stop running. A few minutes later, an older woman approached, frail but upright, her white hair caught in the wind like a small flag of defiance. She carried a paper bag of breadcrumbs and smiled as she began to scatter them for the gulls. "Rain never stops them," she said softly, without looking at him. Elias offered a polite nod, unsure why she'd chosen his bench when the park was nearly empty. After a moment, she glanced at him, her eyes sharp, kind, and strangely knowing. She said, "You look like someone carrying too many invisible things." He blinked, unsure how to respond. "I'm just, thinking," he managed. "Ah, thinking. The heavy kind." He gave a faint, tired smile. "You could say that." She tossed another handful of crumbs into the air. "You know," she murmured, "forgiveness doesn't start when you say the words. It starts when you stop pretending you don't need to." Elias turned toward her, startled by the precision of her words. "How did you—" She said, "I've lived long enough to recognize that look," simply, lifting her scarred hand to wave away his question. "Whatever it is, name it. You can't set down a weight if you won't call it yours." And then she left, her small frame vanishing down the rain-slick street, leaving behind a silence that, for the first time, didn't feel empty, but alive with meaning. The next morning, Elias woke with the sound of rain still in his mind and the old woman's words echoing louder than any alarm. "You can't set down a weight if you won't call it yours." For the first time in years, he didn't make a list. He didn't open his laptop or iron his shirt. He simply sat at the table, across from the empty chair, and allowed silence to stretch between him and the life he'd been avoiding. Then, without planning to, he reached for a pen. The words came slowly, unevenly, but they came. "Mara, I should have said this long ago. I'm sorry, not for what went wrong, but for what I never said. I thought silence was strength. I see now it was fear." He stopped there, folded the page, no signature, no address. He didn't need to send it. The act itself felt like breathing after holding it in for too long. That afternoon, he walked to the harbor again, the same bench, the same restless sea. But something small had shifted, not in the world, but in him. The water no longer looked angry. It looked honest. The following days moved differently. He began saying small truths to people he barely knew. A quiet, "I miss you," to a friend he'd drifted from. A simple, "I was wrong," in a meeting when he'd overlooked someone's idea. No grand gestures, no speeches, just honesty, offered gently. Every time he spoke truth, he felt something loosen, as if each word freed a knot tied years ago. Elias learned that healing wasn't a sudden sunrise. It was more like the tide, steady, patient, returning again and again to wash over the same shore until the rough edges softened. Seasons changed quietly in Bracewater. The summer light found its way back into the town, painting golden paths along the harbor where Elias now walked each morning, not rushing, not escaping, just walking. He no longer lived by lists. His days were guided by smaller intentions: to listen, to notice, to be kind. He found peace not in the precision of plans, but in the softness of moments that could never be planned. A stranger's smile, a gust of sea wind, a laugh that escaped unexpectedly. He began reconnecting with people he'd quietly drifted away from. A coffee here, a short message there. The words still came slowly, but now they carried warmth instead of hesitation. When someone mentioned Mara, he didn't freeze or deflect. He smiled. "She taught me something," he said simply, and that was enough. At work, Elias changed too. He stopped measuring his worth in finished projects or clean spreadsheets. Instead, he started mentoring the younger employees, listening to their fears, reminding them that mistakes don't define a person. For the first time, his office felt alive with laughter, conversation, and imperfect humanity. Sometimes he still thought about the old woman by the bench, her scarred hand scattering crumbs like confessions. He never saw her again, but her voice had become part of him. Whenever regret tried to return, he whispered her words like a prayer. Name it, then let it go. And in those quiet moments, Elias realized something he'd never allowed himself to believe. Peace wasn't a reward for perfection. It was a home you built when you finally forgave yourself. The man who once lived to avoid his pain had learned to live.
Elias's story is not rare. It's the quiet, invisible story of countless hearts that carry their regrets like stones, silent, heavy, and hidden. But his journey reminds us that the path to peace isn't paved with perfection. It's built through the courage to face ourselves honestly again and again. Here are the truths his story leaves behind. Forgiveness begins with naming. You cannot heal what you refuse to see. Silence is not strength. Sometimes the bravest act is to speak the words you've buried. Discipline is a gift, but not when it becomes armor. Structure should serve your peace, not protect your pain. Failure is not the end. It's the first honest conversation between who you were and who you can still become. Healing is slow, and that's okay. Real transformation happens in small, unglamorous steps. Peace is not found, it's built, gently, daily, imperfectly. You cannot control the past, but you can choose the way you carry it. So if you find yourself sitting with your own silent regrets, remember Elias and the rain and the bench and the moment he finally stopped running. You don't need the world to forgive you first. You only need to begin forgiving yourself. Because healing doesn't start when time passes. It starts when you whisper to your heart, "It's okay to let go now." If this story touched something in you, share it, breathe it, and begin again. Peace begins with one honest word.